They said she worked too much. They said she was old-fashioned, replaceable a relic in a world obsessed with speed. So they fired her, erasing 32 years of loyalty with a single meeting and a signature on a page. But 7 days later, the phones at Harper & Cole would not stop ringing. Clients demanded one thing, her return. And as the company unraveled, they would learn a truth they had buried too soon. Some people cannot be replaced because they were the foundation all along. I was fired for working too much. 7 days later, the CEO begged me to come back. The words slip out softly, almost like a confession, steady, deliberate, and stripped of bitterness. Outside, the Seattle skyline glows under the amber light of dawn. Inside, the faint hum of the printer, the ticking of a wall clock, and the rhythmic tapping of fingers on a keyboard form the soundtrack of another early morning at Harper & Cole Consulting. At her desk near the far window sits Margaret Hale, 59 years old, composed yet weary, her glasses glinting under the pale office lights. She is the kind of woman who moves through chaos with a quiet certainty, the kind only 3 decades of loyalty can forge. While most of her colleagues are still in traffic, she is already buried in numbers, balancing ledgers and correcting a client's fiscal report. Margaret's phone vibrates. A message from Ethan Morales appears on the screen. Ethan Morales, need your help. Urgent discrepancy in our quarterly filing. No sigh escapes her. No complaint. She simply reaches for her coffee and begins to work. Within the hour, she is in a virtual meeting, her calm voice guiding Ethan's anxious finance team through an error that could have cost them millions. Her tone is professional, never hurried. When the issue is resolved, Ethan exhales in relief. Ethan, you just saved my entire quarter, Margaret. Margaret, you saved it yourself. I just rearranged the numbers you already had. He laughs, but she doesn't. Margaret never takes credit. She only fixes what is broken. When the call ends, she notes the time, 7:42 a.m. and turns to her email. A flood of unread messages awaits. Above them all is one marked high priority. The sender, Dylan Brooks, recently promoted head of the client accounting department. Subject, new departmental efficiency goals. Margaret opens the email. Dylan's words are sharp, managerial, and heavy with corporate jargon. Effective immediately, all senior staff will report daily activity logs to ensure alignment with our productivity KPIs. Let's eliminate redundancies and unnecessary overtime. She leans back slightly, eyes narrowing. Eliminate overtime. The irony does not escape her. For 32 years, Harper & Cole's clients had relied on her because of that overtime, the extra hours no one else would give. Dylan strides into the open office later that morning, his suit immaculate, his confidence almost theatrical. At 42, he is handsome in a calculated way, but his eyes betray a constant tension and insecurity polished beneath ambition. Once, he had been Margaret's junior associate. Now, he is her superior. He stops by her desk, offering a quick, practiced smile. Dylan, Margaret, you've been here longer than most of us. I'm counting on you to set an example for the team. Margaret, I always have. Dylan, good. Then you'll have no trouble adjusting to the new system. No more unlogged overtime. No more side communication with clients. Everything goes through the department head. The subtext is clear, through him. Margaret gives a polite nod. Understood. But behind her calm, a shadow forms, the quiet realization that something fundamental has changed. Across the room, Sophie Lane, Dylan's new assistant, watches the exchange with the careful curiosity of someone who wants to learn power by observing it. At 29, she is quick, ambitious, and visibly eager to please. During lunch, she approaches Dylan in the glass conference room, lowering her voice. Sophie, she doesn't seem to like the new system. Dylan, Margaret's old school. She'll adapt or she won't. Either way, it will prove my point. Sophie hesitates. She's respected. Even the clients call her directly. Dylan, and that's exactly the problem. He turns back to his laptop, the reflection of spreadsheets flickering across his face. Over the next few weeks, the pressure builds silently. New procedures flood in, double reporting, unnecessary revisions, layers of bureaucracy that make routine tasks drag for days. Dylan begins forwarding his and Sophie's assignments to Margaret for review, then quietly marks them as her deliverables in the tracking sheet. At first, she doesn't notice. Then one evening, close to midnight, as rain lashes against the office windows, she hears the ping of a new email. Subject: Urgent need by tomorrow morning. Sent by Dylan Brooks. Timestamp: 11:58 p.m. Her hand pauses above the mouse. For a moment, the exhaustion in her eyes softens into disbelief. But she opens the file anyway. Inside are dozens of pending client reports, half-finished, mislabeled, riddled with missing data. She breathes deeply, steadying herself. Then, without complaint, she begins to work. By the time the first rays of morning spill through the blinds, the reports are done. The following Monday, whispers trail behind her in the hallway. Phrases like, she's been logging too many hours, and maybe she's padding her overtime. Margaret says nothing. She has survived rumors before. Yet something in their tone feels coordinated, deliberate. That afternoon, she catches Sophie at the copier, laughing softly with a junior staffer. When Margaret approaches, their laughter dies instantly. The silence that follows is sharper than any insult. 2 days later, an email from HR lands in her inbox. Subject: Administrative review meeting. Attendance required. In the meeting room, the air feels sterile, rehearsed. Dylan sits opposite her, hands clasped, his expression carefully sympathetic. Next to him is Natalie Chin, the firm's compliance officer, calm, neutral, unreadable. Natalie: Ms. Hale, we've received reports of irregular overtime entries associated with your account. We're opening a preliminary audit. Margaret: Irregular. Dylan: Nothing personal, Margaret. Just part of our transparency initiative. He says it with the tone of someone doing her a favor. Natalie slides a folder across the table, printouts of her logged hours, highlighted in red. Natalie: Until we verify these records, the company requests that you take an administrative leave for 2 weeks. With pay. A pause. Only the faint hum of the air conditioner fills the silence. Margaret closes the folder gently. Her voice remains steady. Margaret: I understand. She stands, thanks them both, and leaves the room. As she walks down the corridor, sunlight cuts through the frosted glass panels, illuminating rows of cubicles, people pretending not to watch. Near the elevator stands Sophie, arms crossed, an amused curve at the corner of her lips. Sophie: Enjoy your vacation, Margaret. Margaret stops for a second, her reflection merging with Sophie's in the elevator door. The metallic doors slide shut, swallowing the sound of the office, and with it, 32 years of quiet devotion. The last thing we hear is the slow tick of the wall clock. Tick, tick, then silence. The first morning of leave arrives with a pale gray sky over Seattle and a rain that seems to whisper along the windows. Margaret wakes before dawn out of habit. The impulse to reach for her work phone is a reflex that her body still honors. It is not there. It sits in a cardboard box by the door, next to a neat stack of files tied with twine. The quiet is not peace. It is an empty room after a symphony has ended. She makes tea and stands at the kitchen counter. A calendar hangs nearby. The square around March 31st has a faint pencil mark, an old reminder for a client filing that she has tended every year for 20 years. The date glows like an ember. She erases it with the gentlest pressure, as if she were wiping soot from glass. At Harper & Cole, the investigation begins. Compliance pulls time logs, delivery trackers, and server metadata. Natalie Chen's voice is even in every meeting, her questions precise. She requests the raw export of overtime entries, the email headers, and the access logs to the shared folders. She notes that several midnight assignments appear in Margaret's queue, yet the assigning user field is blank. She asks why the timestamps on a handful of messages from Dylan's account show a reissued header. A junior technician explains that a header can be rewritten if a draft is duplicated and resent. It is possible to make it look like a request came earlier than it did. It is also possible to scrub the original trigger entirely. Dylan sits very straight in his chair. His tone is patient, almost instructional. He says that the department adopted new productivity tools. He claims that senior staff resisted. He talks of misalignment, legacy culture, and the need for uniformity. He says that Margaret has always preferred to handle client matters privately. He says that the new system cannot incorporate old habits without risk. The word risk repeats until it feels like a metronome. Aaron Cole, young and eager to prove resolve, nods with a serious expression that mimics conviction. Human Resources hesitates. A thin folder grows thicker with printouts, and no one is willing to stake a reputation on a feeling. There is no hard proof of tampering, not yet. There are red flags and a narrative that seems simple. A leader calls for speed. The line between decisiveness and haste narrows to a wire. On the second day of leave, Margaret returns to the office to clear her desk. The lights are too bright. The silence does not belong to her anymore. She moves slowly, as if walking through water, gathering pens, her mug with the faint ring at its base, the framed photograph of a harbor at dusk. She packs the details of a life no one asked about. A voice behind her breaks the stillness. Margaret. She turns. Ethan Morales stands in the doorway with rain on his coat and concern in his eyes. I heard you were away, he says. I did not know why. She gives him a small smile. Administrative leave. It is routine. It is not routine for the person who saves my quarter before sunrise, he answers. Is there anything I can do? She opens the top drawer, removes a thin folder, and places it in his hands. The tax savings plan we discussed, she says. It is not complete. The notes in the margin show the sequence. Follow the sequence, and you will be fine. If you need me, call my home phone. He studies her, wanting to protest, then does not. Gratitude softens his features. You are the most professional person I have worked with, he says quietly. She inclines her head in thanks. After he leaves, she watches the door for a breath longer than she intends. The room is a map of what she has lost and what she still carries. The email arrives that evening. Subject: Employment Status Resolution. The language is formal. It references preliminary findings. It states that Harper & Cole terminates her employment effective March 31st. The number of the policy is named. The signature belongs to a person she has never met. Margaret prints the message, signs the acknowledgement for receipt, and places the paper into a manila envelope. There is no argument. There is only a pen moving across a line while a piano piece plays low on the radio, a minor key that clings to the air like mist. The next morning, Sophie waits by the elevator with a box of packing tissue and a smile that tries to pass as sympathy. I can help you with your things, Sophie offers. This must be difficult. Margaret studies her, then speaks softly. Be careful what you build your ladder on, Sophie. Some foundations crack. She steps into the elevator and presses the button without looking away. The doors close on Sophie's frozen expression. The image of a young woman standing on the wrong rung prints itself in memory, like a photograph left too long in the developer. Outside, the city smells of wet pavement. Margaret walks with the envelope tucked under her arm. The rain is steady. She does not rush. There is a dignity in measured steps. In another part of the city, Ethan writes a letter. He addresses it to Aaron Cole with a copy to compliance. He describes a pattern that spans years, a record of diligence, and a habit of answering calls when no one else does. He writes, if you remove the person who holds the threads, do not be surprised when the whole fabric loosens. He presses send. The message moves into the system where someone will decide if it ascends or disappears. It disappears. Dylan sees the copy in a shared mailbox and routes it to an archive with a neutral label that no one will open. The week that follows is a long corridor without windows. Margaret learns the art of not reaching for a schedule. She cooks once and eats in silence. She makes lists and then throws them away. She accomplishes nothing and everything. The phone does not ring. Until it does. At first it is a single call with the corporate ID on the screen. She lets it go to voicemail and places the phone face down. Then it is another and another. The sound becomes a pattern, and the pattern becomes a summons. She answers on the 12th ring of the 10th call, because silence is not courage if it is only avoidance. Mrs. Hale, a voice says, quick and breathless. This is Harper & Cole headquarters. Please hold for the chief executive officer. She hears the transfer click, then a pause filled with the static of urgent breathing. Mrs. Hale, Aaron Cole says, and now the controlled tone is gone. I need to ask you a question. I am listening, she replies. Who exactly are you? The words hang in the air. She looks at the window where the rain is breaking into silver threads upon the glass. A memory opens inside her of the first day she walked into the firm, a younger woman with a single suit and a single promise to give more than she takes. She thinks of ledger lines and midnight calls, of patients who wait without complaint, of numbers that hold when names do not. I am the person your clients trusted, she says at last. I am the one who answered when the phone rang before dawn. There is another silence. When it ends, his voice is a shade lower. We have 49 cancellations in process, he says. They're asking for you by name. The sound in the room changes. It is the same rain, but it is not the same day. I will come in, Margaret says. I will hear what you need. She ends the call and stands very still. The quiet is no longer an absence. It is a breath drawn before a door opens. The box by the door waits, light now, as if the weight has shifted. From objects to truth. She takes her coat from the hook. The rain greets her like an orchestra tuning for a second movement. She steps into it, and it rises around her like a curtain lifting. The lobby of Harper & Cole feels colder than Margaret remembered, as if the building had learned to reflect the temperature of its own distress. Screens behind the reception desk flicker with the firm's revenue dashboard, a field of red cells pulsing like wounds that refuse to close. The receptionist lowers her voice into a whisper, but whispers cannot soften a number when it is falling. On the 12th floor, the storm is not weather but data. The client success team sits in a row of open cubes, headsets on, faces drawn. A chorus of phrases loops through the air. We're sorry for the inconvenience. We understand your concern. Yes, we can process the termination request. 49 accounts in flux have created a tide that the team cannot outrun. A manager lifts his hand to straighten a stack of cancellation forms, then sets it down without touching them, as if paper could burn. Natalie Chin walks the corridor with a folder pressed to her chest and a file of server logs pinned under her arm. She does not rush. She does not need to. Every step she takes lands with the quiet confidence of a woman who trusts that facts are already waiting for her in the room ahead. When the elevator doors open again, Margaret steps out, her expression composed, her coat still damp from the steady Seattle rain. Natalie greets her with a respectful nod. Thank you for coming, Ms. Hale, Natalie says. I did not come for them, Margaret answers. I came for the truth. They enter the boardroom together. The room is a long rectangle of glass and oak, anchored by a view of the city that should have been calming. Today it is a mirror that offers no comfort. At the far end sits Aaron Cole, hands folded, the weight of a decision on his shoulders. The directors flank him like discreet statues. Dylan Brooks occupies a chair to the right, back straight, jaw set, a steel pen aligned perfectly with the edge of his notepad. Sophie Lane sits a seat behind him, fingers clenched around a legal pad that is still blank. Natalie begins. She places the folder on the table and opens it with a measured hand. Preliminary findings, she says, and each syllable clicks into the silence. We examined overtime logs, email headers, server access trails, and version histories in the client reporting repository. We also reviewed message routing within shared mailboxes used by department leadership. She looks at Dylan without accusation, only with precision. We found a pattern of late-night task assignments routed through system drafts, which obscured the original origin. We traced metadata to a supervisor account that duplicated and reissued requests at artificial timestamps. We also identified deletion of initial assignment records within a limited permission window. She lifts a page. That window aligns with access granted to Mr. Brooks and Ms. Lane. Dylan leans forward. His voice is even, as if calm could function as a shield. I asked for aggressive alignment, he says. The department needed speed. We were under mandate to reduce waste. Senior staff refused to adapt. The tools made it possible to streamline. If logs appear inconsistent, it is because old habits do not fit new systems. That is not misconduct. That is change. Natalie does not look away. Change is not the same as erasure. She turns to Margaret. Ms. Hale, you indicated you maintained personal redundancies for critical client correspondence. Margaret places a small silver drive on the table. The object is unremarkable, which gives it power. She slides it toward Natalie. Mirrors of all client critical emails and attachments for the past 12 months, Margaret says. I kept them because I never liked blank spaces in a story. Natalie inserts the drive into a secure port. The screen on the far wall wakes and fills with threads of messages. There are midnight requests bearing Dylan's signature. There are responses from Margaret with attachments completed before dawn. There are thank you notes from clients with timestamps that prove a cycle of work no one else claimed. There is a single forwarded letter that should have reached Aaron and did not. Natalie opens it. On the screen, Ethan Morales looks into the camera, face steady, voice clear. If you remove the person who holds the threads, he says, do not be surprised when the fabric loosens. Our compliance did not fall apart because Margaret left. It fell apart because you did not understand why we stayed. The room holds the sentence like a fragile instrument. No one moves. Aaron clears his throat, but the sound does not mask regret. Mr. Brooks, Natalie continues, we compared deletion logs with security badge records. The deletions occurred within minutes of your late departures. We also recovered expense submissions that appeared duplicated across vendors with minor changes in memo lines. These were approved from your terminal. Sophie swallows. Her hand tightens on the legal pad until the paper wrinkles. Dylan exhales through his nose, a gesture so small it feels like a refusal to yield. I was under pressure, he says. We all were. Numbers do not move by themselves. I needed a headline improvement before quarter close. I made choices to protect the department. I protected results. Results do not absolve methods, Natalie replies. Sophie lifts her face. The bravado she practiced is gone. What remains is a young woman who has run too far in the wrong direction and finally sees the edge ahead. He told me to clear the assignment logs, she says, voice unsteady but audible. He said it would only be temporary. He said if it looked clean, no one would question it. I knew it was wrong. I did it anyway. I am sorry. Margaret feels neither triumph nor anger. What rises in her is something quieter and more dangerous, a grief for the cost of a ladder leaned against the wrong wall. Aaron turns to the directors. Their eyes are not cold, only grave. He knows what is required before he asks for it. Natalie speaks for the process. Recommendation, she says, reading from the memo now displayed on the screen, every word formal, every consequence clear. Immediate termination of employment for Mr. Dylan Brooks and Ms. Sophie Lane on grounds of misconduct and data tampering. Referral of expense irregularities to external audit. Issuance of a written apology to Ms. Margaret Hale for wrongful termination based on incomplete and manipulated evidence. Restoration of her professional record. Public correction to clients affected. Silence follows, and then the soft friction of paper as the board members sign their names. The signatures look like small rivers, each one a narrow current choosing a direction. Aaron faces Margaret. There is no managerial polish in his voice now, only the unvarnished tone of a son who has stepped into a chair too large and is learning what it means to sit in it. Miss Hale, he says, I failed to see what was in front of me. I am sorry. Margaret does not move for a moment. The apology does not change the past. It does, however, acknowledge that the past is real. Thank you, she says. The directors stand. Natalie gathers the drive and closes her folder. Security waits outside the door with the discretion of people trained to be invisible. Dylan rises, but some portion of his height has disappeared. He is still a man, but the armor is gone. He looks at Margaret as one might look at a horizon that will not move. In the doorway, Sophie turns. Tears have blurred her mascara into soft shadows. She mouths the word sorry because speech would be too loud. When the room is empty again, Aaron remains seated. He studies the city through the glass and then looks back at the woman who did not ask to be a lesson and became one anyway. Would you ever consider coming back, Miss Hale? Margaret holds his gaze. Outside, the rain has thinned to a mist, a veil the light can pass through. She can see the harbor as a pale outline, familiar and new at once. Once you have been erased, she says, you learn to draw your own outline. A faint smile lifts the corner of her mouth. The line hovers between them like a bridge that can be crossed or admired from the shore. The scene ends before anyone chooses. The rain has stopped, leaving a faint silver mist over the streets of Seattle. Margaret steps out of the Harper and Cole building for the last time. The cold air brushes against her cheeks, but she does not shiver. For the first time in months, her shoulders are not heavy. Behind her, the glass tower gleams under a hesitant sun, an empire of numbers and ambition that once defined her life. Now it is just a reflection fading in a puddle. Days pass like echoes in an empty corridor. News of the board's decision spreads quickly through the corporate world. Harper and Cole issues an internal memo, sterile, bureaucratic, yet sharp in implication. Following a completed audit, the company confirms the termination of Mr. Dylan Brooks and Ms. Sophie Lane for misconduct and data tampering. Within hours, the industry knows. Dylan's name vanishes from client networks. Recruiters stop returning his calls. Sophie's profile disappears from professional listings. The same people who once sought their approval now look away when they pass on the street. Dylan sits alone in a downtown cafe, a paper cup cooling in his hand. He stares at the rain-beaten window, the reflection of a man who has lost the language of control. His phone vibrates with messages, none of them offering work. He scrolls to Margaret's contact and hovers over the call button, but shame is a silence stronger than pride. Sophie, meanwhile, has retreated to a small apartment by the bay. The walls are bare, the air thick with regret. She replays the memory of her last conversation with Margaret, the warning she ignored. Some foundations crack. The truth of it haunts her. She opens her laptop and types an email with trembling fingers. Subject: apology. I was wrong. I thought I was surviving. But I was only sinking. I am truly sorry, Margaret. She presses send, not expecting an answer. On a quiet afternoon, a car stops in front of Margaret's small townhouse. Aaron Cole steps out, no longer wearing the confidence of a young executive. He carries an envelope, but his expression is what disarms her humble, uncertain human. She opens the door before he knocks. Aaron, I wanted to give you this in person. He hands her the envelope. Inside lies a letter, handwritten in blue ink, an official reinstatement, full restoration of benefits, and a personal note beneath the company seal. What I learned from you is worth more than any audit. I hope you will return not as an employee, but as our ethics consultant. Teach us what integrity looks like when no one is watching. Margaret studies the letter for a long moment. The offer is generous, even symbolic. Yet, something in her chest resists. Margaret, I appreciate this, Aaron. But my place is not there anymore. When a chapter closes, you do not rewrite it, you begin another. He nods slowly, accepting the refusal with a quiet respect. Aaron, then, let me say this, at least. I am sorry, not as a CEO, but as a man who mistook confidence for wisdom. Her smile is small but genuine. Margaret, wisdom always arrives late. That is what makes it valuable. They shake hands. The moment is still, the past forgiven but not forgotten. 2 months later, the first morning light falls across the windows of a modest office on the city's outskirts. A wooden sign above the door reads, Hale Consulting, integrity above all. Inside, the air smells faintly of paper and cedar. Margaret arranges fresh lilies in a vase and powers on her laptop. The phone rings, an unfamiliar number. Caller, Mrs. Hale? This is Morales Logistics. Ethan gave us your contact. We would like to move our account to your firm. Her voice remains calm, but her eyes glisten. Margaret, I would be honored to help. She notes the details carefully, each word like a stitch in a new tapestry. The satisfaction is quiet, steady, not triumph, but peace. Later that afternoon, Ethan Morales visits, carrying 2 cups of coffee and his unshakable smile. Ethan, the industry misses you. Half the firms are wondering how to poach your clients. Margaret, let them wonder. I am done being poached. They share a laugh. He looks around the office, small, sunlit, alive. Ethan, you built this yourself. Margaret, yes. It is honest work. No walls of glass, no politics, just people who want to do things right. He nods. That is rarer than profit. When he leaves, the late afternoon light settles across her desk. Margaret opens an old leather-bound notebook and begins to write a list of clients, a code of conduct, a promise to herself. The words are simple, but carry the weight of her years. In another corner of the city, Dylan finally calls. His voice is hoarse, stripped of all pretense. Dylan, Margaret, I do not expect forgiveness. But I need you to know I understand now. I thought control meant strength. It only meant fear. There is a long pause. She listens, not with anger, but with the patience of someone who has already survived the storm. Margaret, we all live inside our mistakes until we learn from them. I hope you find your way out. When the call ends, she closes her eyes. The silence feels lighter now, like sunlight resting on water. Sophie's email remains unanswered, but one morning, Margaret prints it and folds it neatly into a drawer labeled lessons. Some apologies are not meant to be returned, they are meant to be kept. Evening falls gently over Seattle. Margaret locks her office and steps outside. The air carries the scent of rain and distant coffee. Across the street, the lights of downtown shimmer through the fog like constellations rediscovered. She walks to the edge of the pier, where the water hums against the wooden posts. The wind tugs softly at her coat. For a moment, she imagines the years behind her, the quiet mornings, the sleepless nights, the betrayal, the reckoning. All of it converges into a single truth: she was never merely surviving. She was enduring. Her voice, steady and clear, breaks the stillness. They tried to erase me. But the truth does not fade at imprints. In losing my job, I found my purpose. Respect is not granted by title, it is earned by truth. The camera would linger on her face, serene, luminous under the setting sun. The world around her breathes again. Somewhere, a new story is already beginning. Fade out. The story of Margaret Hale did not end when the rain stopped outside her new office. It began there quietly, without applause, without witnesses. It began in the stillness of a woman who refused to let betrayal be the final word of her life. Some stories speak of victory as noise, as fanfare, as an echo that must be heard to be real. But Margaret's triumph whispered. It existed in the patience of her hands, in the steadiness of her breath, in the courage it takes to rebuild when no one is watching. She was not a heroine carved from marble. She was flesh and flaw, tempered by years of small choices, the kind that seem invisible until they form the shape of a legate. What destroyed her was not failure, but faith misplaced in a world that mistakes efficiency for worth. What saved her was not revenge, but the decision to live with integrity even when no one else did. That is the quiet kind of strength this world forgets too easily: the strength to stand still when others run, to speak gently when others shout, to work honestly when deceit seems faux. In every workplace, every home, every human heart, there will always be a Dylan hungry for validation and a Sophie afraid to fall behind. But there must also be a Margaret, the one who holds the thread when others cut corners, who understands that doing what is right will not always be rewarded, but will always matter. Maybe you have known a Margaret in your own life. Maybe you are one silently holding the structure together while others claim the credit. If so, this story is a reminder. Your value is not measured by who notices your effort, but by the honesty that lives in your work long after you leave the room. The truth is, power fades. Titles change. But integrity endures. It becomes the quiet echo people hear when your name is spoken years later. It is what makes the world pause and remember that decency still exists. And now, as this story reaches its end, I would like to ask you something, not as a narrator, but as a fellow traveler through all the fragile corners of life. If perhaps you, too, believe the world needs more Margarets. If you do, stay with us. Subscribe. Comment. Keep the conversation alive. Because stories like this are not just told, they are continued, one honest see. In the end, the measure of a life is not the titles we hold, but the truth we stand by when the lights go out. Margaret knew that. And now so,